This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Hello and welcome everyone. I hope you had a nice networking break. We're joined today on stage for this very exciting panel, very hot topic, pesticides, how to reduce them, whether they should be reduced by the amounts that are being discussed, what's the way forward, what are the alternatives. Don't forget to use the swap card to ask questions for the online audience as well. This is the opportunity to engage with us. And yeah, let me just start by introducing our panelists. We have on my left Karsten Bruhl from the University of Koblenz. He's a senior researcher and expert on pesticides. Further down, we have Jennifer Lewis from the International Biocontrol Manufacturers Association, IBMA. And then to her left, we have Andrew Owen Griffiths from DG Sante and a man in charge of the pesticide reduction law. And on the screen behind us, we have Karl Bauer. He's a member of the Green Party at the German Parliament, Bundestag. Right, so today we're looking at pesticides. Back in June, the European Commission made this proposal to halve pesticide use and risk by 2030. The Commission proposed binding reduction targets for member states. There is some flexibility there. The Commission has also been saying that it's open to discussion about this proposal. But there are also, the reception so far has been mixed, the reception to this proposal. We've seen national governments heavily criticizing certain aspects of this proposal, whether it's the overall ambition or the associated impact assessment, and of course, whether there is enough tools or whether this whole package is ready to be implemented. We also had a discussion in the Parliament where Mr. Owen Griffiths participated and faced quite a few difficult questions from the members of the European Parliament. Without further ado, my first question is for you, Mr. Owen Griffiths. Andrew, are you happy with the proposal? Do you think it is a solid proposal? Do you think the criticism is uncalled for, unwarranted?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the proposal we think is a strong proposal. It's an ambitious proposal in line with the ambitions of the Farm to Fork targets. I think the first thing to say is it's quite clear that pesticides is a divisive and emotional topic, if I could say so. It gives very mixed feedback and very diverse opinions from stakeholders, but it's very of interest to people. I think we've got over 9,000 feedbacks on the feedback for the proposal. We're going through those. But as we go through them, we can see it gives a very diverse range of opinions from ban everything to do nothing. So we are happy that the proposal tries to find a way between those diverse opinions.
And do you think the ambition is high enough?
Yes, I mean, just to be clear, the ambition is a target for 2030. So we're not saying, as some people have said, for a ban on all chemical pesticides immediately. We're not even calling for a ban on a reduction by 50% of chemical pesticides in 2025. This is a target for 2030. It's putting into legislation an ambition and a direction for a transition to more sustainable agriculture. So that's not a change immediately. That's something that is where we want to be, and changes need to be made up to that point. So it's a transition, and it's a support for a transition in a legislative proposal.
Thank you. Now turning over to Karl on the screen. Karl, you've hit the spotlight not too long ago by annoying some farmers in the apple growing region of Tyrol, where I think you received over 1,000 lawsuits for your campaign to reduce pesticide use there. And yeah, so my question to you is, what do you think of this proposal? What do you make of the Commission's ambition for the EU to reduce pesticide use by 50% and risk by 50% by 2030?
I really appreciate the proposal because we can see that its predecessor, the Sustainable Use Directive, has not worked at all, and it's the Commission to give more incentives and even pressure to the member states to really do something, and this is part of the core of the proposal. So I think it is good to have it. I would see some room for improvement, especially when talking about the risk indicator that is in the appendix of the proposal, to make it really necessary for the member states to indeed change something in agriculture and not just calculate down its pesticide uses. And I also think that we should, on the long run, have the goal to indeed ban the use of chemical pesticides at all. I think that is something that farmers also need to be able to plan for the future. If we give some time in the future, even after 2030, where they should not use chemical pesticides at all, they could start now to change into that direction and not invest into the wrong direction no more.
Thank you. And now turning over to Jennifer, you represent a side of plant protection that is that focuses on biological alternatives to chemical pesticides. What do you make of the proposal, and does it provide an opening for these alternatives?
Well, the sustainable use regulation is a game changer, and I think that it supports certainly biological control and other alternatives. And we need those if we're really going to make this transition. And when we think about agriculture, we think about it productivity, food, crops, plants, but we also think about biodiversity, we also think about nature, we also think about the impact on the environment. And that's really the vision for Farm to Fork. And the sustainable use regulation, as it's being proposed, is actually a real game changer in moving us in that direction, while having balance, because at the heart of it is integrated pest management. And integrated pest management is about putting biology first and going through a series of interventions that are using what you have. So they're using your crop rotation, using the soil, using mechanical means, and eventually using biological means, and at the very last resort, using chemistry. So it's really starting to help to move towards the biodiversity and the alternatives that we're looking for.
Thank you. And lastly, Karsten, you're an expert when it comes to the risks associated with chemical pesticide use. Can you just quickly tell us why it's essential maybe to implement this law, and whether this law can actually deliver on the challenges that Europe's agricultural systems and environment are facing?
Yeah, I also agree that it's a very important aim to aim for 50% reduction of pesticides, mainly because the regulation of pesticides is based on a risk assessment that is not protective, because it regulates single substances. But lately we discover that, for example, in agricultural soils, we found chronically mixtures of pesticides, like up to 20, 30 different kinds of pesticides are in the ground all the time. It was mentioned at the beginning of this morning that soil health is crucial, that this agriculture system is running. I can only say that we currently have no idea what 30 pesticides do to this soil health system. And they are not regulated for, and therefore it's clear that one of the conclusions is that you then have to change the system and try to reduce pesticides. Regarding the ambitious, I also have to agree with Karl Behr that it really depends on the indicator that we will use to measure this reduction. So there are currently a few proposals out there, and they all use different kind of indicators depending on the risks and the volume and highly hazardous pesticides, and I think that needs to be evaluated.
Thank you. And going forward, so the consensus among also member states and even the European Parliament is that yes, we need to reduce those risks associated with chemical pesticides. But industry representatives, including I think there is Syngenta, sometimes circulates a fact sheet of whether or not we can actually grow enough food to feed the growing population without the use of pesticides, chemical pesticides. A question maybe for you would be, do you think there is a future without pesticides, completely getting rid of chemical pesticide use in Europe?
I mean, that's only a matter of accepting the aim. I think we are creative enough. We only need now to invest something into an organic farming 2.0 to develop solutions. And currently, at least what I know about is the investment in scientific developments on organic farming, or whatever you want to call it, low-impact pesticide farming, is relatively low. But if we have an ambitious aim that we want to reduce pesticides, we might also try to invest, or we need to invest more money in alternative systems. And I think then there are a lot of possibilities. Maybe the use of biopesticides, as we already heard.
Well, that's a perfect segue. My next question was going to be for you, Jennifer. Is biocontrol the way to, can it substitute the use of chemical pesticides? And what makes it a stronger contender for the future of agriculture, health, plant protection?
Well, biological control is used now. It's here today. And there are thousands and thousands of hectares in Europe and millions around the world that are using biocontrol very successfully and having very productive, fully productive farms. The challenge we have with biological control is, in fact, that it takes a long time to put it onto the market. So the authorization process for biological control needs to speed up. And that's something that is really key to allow us to deliver a lot of products that are in the pipeline or available in a limited way today and have them more available as we go forward.
So concretely, with this new proposal, what's the way forward for you? How do you see it being adopted and implemented?
Well, I see biological control is actually at the heart of IPM. So there's there's a fantastic bit, and thank you to the Commission for putting this in, because I think it's a really valuable point in the sustainable use regulation as proposed. And that's the indicative targets for biological control. And targets are extremely useful. They're also extremely emotive, but they're extremely useful for people to be able to get behind and say, well, actually, this is what we need to be able to do to deliver this target. So, for example, if we want to put a target in, and then there's an indicative target on biological control, what are the things that we need to do to actually get there? Well, one of the things may be that we need more experts in the authorization of biological control. It may be that we need to have more research into IPM. It might be that we need to have more IPM advisors in the field. And all these things are actually mentioned in the Sustainable Use Directive. So it's now down to the member states to look very carefully at what they can do from a positive standpoint. I mean, these are positive targets. We're not talking about reduction targets there. We're talking about what we can do to deliver those alternatives faster to the farmers, so that the farmers have a productive farm and one that allows them to look after the biodiversity and look after the soil for the future.
And Karl, what do you make of that? Do you what's the way to take this forward? The proposal may not be perfect. The law that will eventually kick in may not be perfect, but what do you see? How do you see making the most out of it?
Well, at the moment, we are in a very critical debate that is centered on the question, how can we produce enough food for the world? And I think that even the question is wrong, because we are producing enough food for the world. We are wasting too much. And if I look at Europe, the EU has used more than 60% of its 2019-2020 harvest to feed animal, making 1 calorie for human consumption out of 7 calories that were there before. So the question is not, do we produce enough food? Do we have enough tools in our toolbox for farmers on organic farming? But the question is, are we consuming this food in the right way and wasting it on using it as fuels, or eating that much meat, which is unhealthy at the same way for the planet and for people, is the wrong way. So I think we're discussing the wrong questions sometimes, and I don't think that we should just change very little in agriculture by substituting some pesticides with others, even if there can be advances as well in this case. But we should change the management on the farms very radically, also because we need to preserve biodiversity and we need to adapt agriculture to climate change. And I'm really happy about the second proposal the Commission brought forward with the nature restoration law as well, that brings us into that direction.
So a more holistic approach, I suppose, that looking not just at one specific element of the food system, but looking at the whole implications and effects and impacts. Carsten, what do you think? What's the way to implement this proposal, this law, so that it actually has a tangible impact and reduces those issues that you were mentioning?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main problem that I see is that 7 years or 8 years is not much time, and currently I did not see also a lot of action on it. If I only think of agricultural students in universities, they currently are educated by people that embrace the system of industrialized farming with the use of pesticides. So probably there's nobody even there to teach them, or not enough people to teach the farmers what to do in the future. So the whole implementation process really also needs kind of rethinking of how we educate farmers, how we communicate alternative strategies, and also if there is an incentive on this for the farmer to realize that organic farming is an alternative, and sometimes the prices are even better for the farmer. Maybe the yield is lower, but there's also demand in Europe. So, but this needs to be communicated, and probably it's also necessary to think about the way farmers can sell their products directly on a market, organic farmers, because that's currently not in place that much.
Andrew, what do you make of all of the comments that were made today? We lack a voice that you probably faced quite a bit in the Parliament and from national governments that are kind of critical of this proposal. So maybe let me play the devil's advocate. And yeah, what do you make of the comments here today? Are they? Do you think they're enough to appease the criticism and take this proposal through?
Well, it's nice to have a friendly panel, I would say. I think I'd like to pick up on a couple of points. I think the first is that this proposal, the Sustainable Use Regulation, is part of a package of actions under the Farm to Fork, including next year proposals for horizontal sustainability legislation dealing with supply chain and criteria and definitions for sustainability and added value, and so through the whole chain, including literally from farm to consumer, so the whole chain. So some of the broader issues about value and added value to sustainability will be dealt with in that horizontal legislation. I think perhaps it's a bit strange, but I'll defend the farmers. It's normally the farmers who are who are attacking the proposal. But I think what was raised by Jennifer is crucial. That just because there's a proposal, the pests are not going to go away. We still need to incorporate mechanisms to deal with pest pressure and pest problems. And this principle of integrated pest management is central to the proposal. So what we need is to shift the balance so that chemical use is the last resort and that farmers have the ability and the tools to look at the steps earlier in IPM in good agricultural practice, in crop rotation, in choice of varieties that are resistant, in soil health, in intercropping, and whatever it might be, to reduce pest pressure before it becomes a problem. So it's rather than the issue, which is now the case, okay, we have a pest problem, let's get a pesticide and deal with it. We have to deal with it in a holistic way and look about preventing the pests in the first place. But we recognise that there will be pests, and if they do occur, then we have biological control or low-risk alternatives as the first choice, and only if they are not going to work do we then use the chemicals. So it integrates the concerns of farmers, it integrates the production issues, it's economically based as well. So integrated pest management is central to the proposal, and the more alternatives we have on the market and the more farmers can make those choices, the more it will be applied. So we have a lot of actions in parallel to the proposal to try and bring on board more rapidly alternatives, and those would include legislation on data requirements for microbials, and we're looking at other substances, but also the proposal for new breeding techniques next year. All this will help to bring more choice to the farmer to be able to make the right decision.
Well, it sounds like you've kind of taken an approach that makes quite a few groups happy about kind of the scope of the proposal, but we have to bring in the elephant in the room, the impact assessment. Just Monday, during the Agri-Fish Council, the meeting of agriculture ministers in Brussels, pretty much all of them agreed that there are some concerning elements about the proposal, not least the complete ban on use of pesticides in the so-called sensitive areas, which some countries say would basically affect over 90% of the agricultural land. I think Denmark is a kind of case in point. The other criticism of the impact assessment is that it was drafted before the war, or it doesn't take into account the impact of the war in Ukraine on global food systems, on the supply chains, on the resilience of food systems, and doesn't mention impacts such as the COVID pandemic. So a big question is, 10 countries have asked for the Commission to come up with a new proposal that was backed by several other countries. Will the Commission come up with a new impact assessment?
Just to correct what you said, they didn't ask us to come up with a new proposal. They asked for a supplementary impact assessment, which is something different. So on the issue of the Ukraine war, I mean, it's quite clear we've been through the better regulation procedures. We have a very detailed impact assessment of the proposal. It's true it didn't take into account the Ukraine war because it was produced before the Ukraine war. And I wasn't able to predict that the war was going to take place when the impact assessment was undertaken. Having said that, the Commission has dealt with the issues. We've already had a detailed discussion on food security, very much linked to the Ukraine war, and has responded to that. The Commission has undertaken to do a study on drivers of food security in the context globally of the Ukraine war. And if there are results from that impact on legislative proposals, including on the SUR, then we'll look at them. But it would make no sense to do a specific impact assessment on the Ukraine war and sustainable use regulation, because food security and the effect of the Ukraine war is much broader, and there are many more drivers than just pesticide use.
What about the concerns that were also raised around funding? How will these reduction methods be funded? The cap is currently one of the few instruments that is suggested as one way of funding it. Will the Commission come up with or how will this be funded, basically?
Well, If you look at the proposal, the Commission has quite unusually made a specific proposal in one of the articles for the use of CAP funding to support this transition and to support the application of the farm level requirements of this regulation at farm level for a 5-year period. So, and we've already had a discussion on the CAP already, but so talking about the issue of conditionality in the use of eco schemes and other schemes going beyond the legal requirement, this basically allows all that funding to be used for application at farm level. So we're supporting very much that, or giving the member states the tools to be able to support that transition for this specific piece of legislation for a 5-year period. So that's, I think, a game-changing and significant step by the Commission in supporting this initiative.
And in terms of the actual adoption of this law, the Commission's mandate, and in about 2 years there will be elections into the European Parliament, so we might see a change in direction, we might see a continuation of the Green Deal. We've also heard rumors that governments are looking to stall this process, the adoption of the Sustainable Use of Pesticides Directive. There's no regulation, there's no, at the moment, concrete indication of that, but are you confident that this law will be adopted in time for these ambitions, for the ambition to halve pesticide use and risk by 2030?
I'm always an optimist, so yes.
And the Commission?
Yeah, we obviously are in the hands largely of Parliament and Council because we're in the interinstitutional negotiation phase. So there are external factors that we can't completely control, but our ambition is to proceed as rapidly as possible with the proposal. So is the Commission working on an alternative plan, or in case this proposal falls through, or? At the moment, the proposal we believe will go through. We're not working on any alternatives. We obviously are listening to the representations made by Council and the concerns made by Member States, but the proposal is not to be changed at the moment.
So one last question before we move on to other speakers. What are you willing to budge on? What are you willing to make some compromises on in response to the requests from the 2 other institutions?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say we're able to compromise on anything at the moment. What I would say is that it's quite clear from the feedback from member states, from stakeholders, and indeed from the feedback mechanism, the 9,000 feedbacks that we're going through at the moment, that there are 2 issues that are most divisive. One is the target setting and the allocation of responsibilities for targets between member states. Some member states clearly have a fundamental objection to targets being set at all. And then how you set the target's very difficult, because maths is fairly straightforward. If you have a 50% target at EU level, if some member states are allowed to set below, others are going to have to go above. And whatever driver you use affects somebody else. So if we asked each member state to come up with a proposal, we'd have 27 different proposals, all of which represent the interests of that particular member state. So we have to try and find a balance, and we believe that the proposal we have is a way of taking into account the different criteria that member states have expressed concern about, but in a balanced way, so that there are no huge extremes that are unrealistic. The other issue that's sensitive, and I use the word sensitive humorously, is sensitive areas. It's quite clear that that's an issue that is really, we've had a very strong representation on. And there we need to listen, and we need to understand what the concerns and the practical application problems are in that area. But we do want to maintain an ambition of a higher level of protection in sensitive areas. Sensitive areas, just to be clear, are 2 types of areas. We're talking about urban areas in close proximity to people. So, around a playground or a nursery or an old age pensioners home, I can't see a strong argument for stopping the proposal in those urban areas. But then we're also talking about ecologically sensitive areas, and some member states have a very large extent of agriculture in these sensitive areas, the Natura 2000, Habitats Directive, Water Framework Directive areas. And we have to look at the practicalities of continuing agriculture in those areas, but still maintaining that they are sensitive areas for a reason, an ecological reason, but they need extra protection. So, yeah, that's an issue that we're having to consider and look at.
Are you willing to consider it because you did not anticipate the kind of criticism, or did not anticipate that it would not go through so easily?
Well, obviously in the negotiation phase we need to listen and hear what the proposals of member states are. All I can say at this stage is there's no counter proposals being produced. We don't know of anything. We have heard strong concerns. We are listening to those concerns, and we are trying to understand what the implications of those concerns are. We haven't even got to the stage yet of discussing that article with Council, so it's very early days to say where we're going to go on that. But I would raise, we know it's an issue. From the feedback from member states, from the feedback from the public feedback mechanism, it's clear that's one of the most contentious issues. Right.
Well, we have two speakers from country level, and Germany has a green government, has an agriculture minister who often sounds quite radically different to his counterparts from other countries. But even he raised that issue of sensitive areas being a concern. What do you make of Özdemir's, Mr. Özdemir's response to this? Karl, if you can give us a kind of an insight onto what government, can Germany be the one that's pushing forward this proposal and maintaining the ambition that the Commission has come up with?
I think we are in line with the ambition that the Commission has set, and if I look at the two central points mentioned, the sensitive areas and the targets set on member state level, this is the two things that make a big difference between the directive that we had and the regulation that we are going to become. So it's very clear why there is this much of debate on these two things, because this is what really makes it work. I hope we can stay with that. But looking at Germany very specifically, we have a high amount of sensitive areas that we have notified to the European Union that don't have biodiversity or emissions in the core of the protected area, but also things like landscape protection or protection of individual trees and stuff. So I think we have to go and look at this in a very we will evaluate that and have a look at which areas are really sensitive to pesticide use, which is, of course, what depends on the biodiversity question, and not things that don't have biodiversity in its core won't be sensitive areas in that case. I think that is something that Cem Özdemir and also Silvia Bender have made quite clear before. In general, we support the ambition, I think, in this government.
Jennifer, coming back to the biocontrol, the biological alternatives, is now the moment to expand that side of plant protection industry? Is now the opportunity? How would you convince farmers that they don't have to worry about losing access to those chemical fertilizers because there may be alternatives that they can rely on instead? And how quickly could they switch? How disruptive this proposal could be, and how much could you step in to mitigate that disruption?
Okay. Well, I think the first thing to say is biological control is here now. There are thousands of hectares and thousands of farmers that are using it very successfully. And I think in France, for example, there is even a national plan to move forward with that. And about 10% of the plant protection products in Europe are biocontrolled today. And I think in France it's slightly higher than that, more like sort of 13%. So it's a very real and there are many farmers using it. It works best with the ecosystem. So it's better if there's a bit of biodiversity around. So we see much more of it today in specialty crops. than perhaps we do in arable. And part of that is that there is as others have mentioned, that there's a mindset change. So it's about putting all the other aspects in place first, whether that's your agronomy or how you're actually controlling the pest and monitoring, before one's actually making some sort of intervention. And that can, in some cases, be a mindset change, not in all. Also, I think what's important is that biological control works by regulating the pest generally. It's not... it doesn't kill it in the same way. Some does, but the majority of it actually only regulates. So what one sees is actually when one's launching a new biocontrol product, then often you look at it and you say, well, actually, is that working? Because it's not looking the same as it does when you've used maybe a more blunt chemistry. And we see this, that it takes a little bit more time. Adoption takes more time. It's not that it's less effective, it's that actually it has to work with what's there. So that's an aspect. And I should also say, I mean, the pipelines are full. There's lots in the pipeline. But we do have, Andrew mentioned the data requirements for microbials. That's great, they've been launched, but we need much more of that, because as it currently stands, we sit in the same chemical infrastructure for authorization as the chemistry. So it can take up to 10 years, but between 4 and 8 is the sort of average. Well, that's too late. So we really need to be freeing up the biological control through the authorization process. We must have them authorized, and we must have safe products on the market. So as IBMA, our first concern is that we have safe products on the market, but we need to get there quickly, and we need it to be nimble so that actually the farmers have these tools in their toolbox, because they are crucial.
I thank you. I hate to cut you off, but we only have 20 seconds left, and I still have one question for Andrew. After 2030, what next? What target should the Commission or should the EU adopt next?
You're not going to get me to answer that in 30 seconds. I think that's a long-term ambition. But yes, I mean, the direction we're moving in doesn't stop in 2030. So I think we need a more detailed discussion as to what targets and what follows farm to fork. But that's not going to happen in 30 seconds, and it's not going to happen now. So one step at a time.
Is the direction, though, a complete kind of reshift and abandonment of chemical pesticides?
No, I've explained already that we're not talking about removing chemical pesticides at all. We want a shift in mentality that they are absolutely the last resort. We need to increase the alternatives so that they really are used as a last resort, that we're not dependent on them, that they're used in the same way medicines are used. Only when somebody is really ill, only when the plant is really ill, do we use the chemical.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have. I guess the main takeaways from today's discussion is that it's a rocky discussion. It's a rocky path. The ambition definitely is there, but whether the implementation can happen, that's still an open question. Now, we have a 60-minute lunch break next. It's upstairs, the first session in the afternoon will start at 1:15 p.m. There will be opening remarks by our leading partner, Yara, and it will be followed by a panel discussion, again moderated by me, about food labeling. So if you're interested in Nutri-Score, Nutri-Informed Battery, don't miss this discussion. Thank you so much to all the speakers for joining.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.